Welcome to the lecture series on Indian philosophy, and I'm talking about the Yoga School of Indian philosophy in this lecture. And as you know that in the last lecture I introduced you to the definition of yoga as is given in the Yoga Sutra of Sage Patanjali. So you know that Sage Patanjali defines yoga as Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which is translated as cessation of the modifications of Chitta. Before moving further, let us understand this definition. Now, the very first important term in this definition, as you can see, is Chitta. You remember in Buddhism, Chitta is identified with the mind. In the Sankhya system, however, Chitta is a very comprehensive designation given to the Buddhi, the Ahamkara and the Manas all put together. And you know from my previous lectures on the Sankhya Darshana that Manas or mind receives data or sensations from the sense organs and then it organizes them. Then the ahamkara or the inner principle, which we know is about self-awareness or self-identity, relates that data to itself. It internalizes it. Then the buddhi or intellect produces knowledge of the received data and makes judgments about it possible. And all this happens for the sake of Purusha or the self. Now, since buddhi, ahamkar and manas, they are products of prakriti, they all have the three gunas, that is sattva, rajas and tamas, in different proportions. And these different proportions actually, result into vrittis. They are vrittis. Purusha, we know, is essentially free. But when Purusha gets reflected in the Chitta, he becomes Jiva, who is subjected to various pleasurable and painful experiences. He is then the doer of actions. He is the enjoyer of their results. He is subjected to various afflictions due to vrittis that take place in the Chitta. So the next term that is there in the definition is Vritti. Now, Vritti means modification or change. So, Chitta Vritti means modification of Chitta. And these modifications are constantly happening. As I told you in the last lecture that there are 5 kinds of Chitta Vrittis. They are Pramana, Viparyaya, Vikalpa, Nidra and Smriti. Now, when we understand each of these, you will know how we are so engulfed in these vrittis. So, the first one is Prama, which according to the Sankhya Yoga system are 3 in number. They are Pratyaksha, Anumana and Agama. Pratyaksha, which is direct perception, it is the contact between the sense organs and the object. Now, due to this contact, the Chitta is transformed into the shape of the object. Since Buddhi is closest to Purusha, it catches the reflection of the Purusha and becomes conscious. This is interesting because whenever a person X perceives something, he not only knows the object, but he also knows that he knows the object. Keep in mind that through perception, we know both the specific as well as the generic nature of an object. That is, we know both the cow and the cowness through perception. So basically, we experience the world through perception. Then comes Anumana or inference. In this pramana, the object is not directly perceived but is known through the mediation of the perception of another object, with which it has the relation of vyapti or invariable concomitance. For example, you see a sign on the road and immediately you know what exactly this sign signifies. Now the last Praman accepted by the Sankhya Yoga system is Agama. It is that means of knowledge which makes us know something which we cannot perceive or infer. Now when we rely on the reports of trustworthy people who know about that, or those who have seen the truth, that is what Agam consists of. Now a yogi, for example, he knows everything, be it past, present or future. Everything is like an open book for him. His knowledge goes far beyond the senses. So this was this is what sage Patanjali has to tell us about the three pramana. Now let us understand the second vritti, which is viparyaya, and which is translated as false knowledge. When we take something to be something else, which is non-existent, this is what viparyaya is. Taking a rope to be a snake, this is an example of viparyaya. Here, snake is non-existent. It is not real, right? So this is, we can say, is what illusion is, right? This is actually an illusion. So since Sankhya Yoga are twin schools, so we find three different views regarding the illusory objects. One school within the system, which is generally labeled as the atheistic Sankhya, it says that the illusory object is real. In our case, the snake is real, it is existent, if not here, but somewhere. Now the other view is that the illusory object is both real as well as unreal. Now the unreal is nothing but the modification of the real. So the snake is both existent as well as non-existent. Then the last view, which is attributed to sage Patanjali, is that the object perceived in illusion is unreal. So the snake is non-existent. Actually, I don't wish to go into the details right now, as I'm more interested in telling you about the causes of illusion. They are also 5 in number. So, the 5 causes of illusion. The first is avidya or ignorance. Second is asmita or ego. In other words, false identification of oneself with objectivity. Third is raga or attachment. Fourth is dvesha or aversion, hatred, right? And the fifth is abhinavesha or clinging to life. Abhinavesha is about the fear of losing one's life. It is about death. I will come back to these causes in a while. Let us first finish discussing the kinds of vrittis. So, coming back to the third kind of vritti, which is vikalpa or imagination. It is a verbal delusion resulting from words which correspond to nothing in reality. It is a vritti clearly. Why? Because sometimes when a word is uttered, we do not wait to understand its meaning. Instead, we imagine something and immediately jump to a conclusion. And this is rashness. It makes people behave irrationally. For example, people unnecessarily get angry and miserable due to this impulsive behavior. It clearly is the sign of weakness of the Chitta. Vikalpa manifests itself in various ways, throwing one's mind into vrittis. The fourth vritti is Nidra or sleep. This is a state in which there is preponderance of tamas. There is neither any cognition nor any dream experience. It is deep, dreamless sleep. But it is a vritti because consciousness persists through this entire duration of deep sleep. For otherwise, how would one know that he had a sound sleep and did not have any dreams. It may also mean sometimes, and some people translate it this way, that going blank all of a sudden. And it happens sometimes that while in a discussion we forget what exactly the topic under discussion is. So Nidra may not exactly be sleep. It is Jnana Shunya Nidra Vritti. Now the last Vritti is Smriti or memory. It is a Vritti because impressions of the objects perceived in the past keep coming back. And Smriti is caused by the other four Vrittis. Whether it is any pramana or viparyaya or vikalpa or any dream, it is like throwing a stone into the lake of the Chitta, which obviously causes a ripple, and that ripple gives rise to another ripple or a series of ripples. And this is why Smriti is Vritti. Now do you realize that all the time we are in some or the other state of mental operation, Chitta Vritti. If you remember, in the last lecture I told you that these Vrittis are both Klishta, that is painful, and Aklishta or not painful. The Klishta are the causes of afflictions. Aklishta, one may say, are the states of knowledge. Now it is time to come back to the 5 causes of Vritti. The ones I mentioned while discussing Viparyaya, they are called the kleshas or the defects which cause Vrittis in the Chitta. These 5 kleshas are avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinavesha. The klishta vrittis are due to avidya or ignorance, which is the root cause of all the other kleshas. Let us understand these kleshas one by one. As you know, the first klesha is avidya. Avidya results in taking the everlasting, pure, blissful self to be the non-eternal, impure, painful, not self. Due to avidya, we tend to believe I am the body and not the self, which is pure, effulgent and ever blissful. We look upon the pleasures of the body as the joys of the self. We take the impure bodies of people, of friends and relations to be pure and desirable. At the same time, the sufferings that are actually beneficial, we regard them as objects of aversion. And this whole physical and mental world around us, we take it to be constant and permanent. This is one great delusion. Avidya blocks our knowledge of our authentic identity. It gives rise to asmita or egoism, which is the second klesha. The Chitta, which you know comprises of the buddhi, the ahamkar, the manas, along with the indriyas, are in fact instruments for the Purusha to see the external world. However, avidya leads to the identification of the Purusha with these instruments. And this is what is called asmita or egoism. We say things like, I am the mind, I am angry, I am sad, or I am happy. Do these statements mean anything when we know that in reality we are the same as the self that does not change? If the Purusha or the self is unchangeable, how can it be angry in one moment and happy in the next moment? Purusha is formless, infinite, omnipresent. Nothing in the universe can affect it. Anyway, the next klesha is raga or attachment. This raga arises from our experience of pleasure in the past. So, the memories that we have of the previous pleasurable moments, they instill a desire in us to relive those moments. And you will find that sometimes we find pleasures in things which are quite strange and even harmful. Sadly, wherever we find pleasure, there we get attached. So, next, let us move on to the next glacier, which is dvesha or aversion. It arises from our previous experiences of pain. So, we try to resist things, people, or situations which have caused pain to us in the past. And then the last glacier is Abhinavesha or clinging to life. Now, this sentiment is common to all living beings, whether a person is wise or ignorant. Everyone fears death and lives with the desire to live till eternity. May I live on, may I not cease to exist, is the constant prayer that one does for oneself. Now, this fear of death is interesting. I say this because fear of death cannot come to someone who has not experienced death before. And what does that mean? It means that yoga system proves the existence of past lives through this argument. Anyway, so we know that Abhinavesha too is an affliction. It is a glacier. So what the yoga system emphasizes is that this Chitta Vritti is the cause of dukkha or suffering. And Indian philosophy is all about eradicating dukkha. Sage Patanjali therefore begins the Yoga Sutra with the suggestion of putting an end to this suffering. And therefore, the last term in the second sutra, which is Nirodha, and the sutra is Chitta Vritti Nirodha, this term Nirodha is significant. Nirodha means cessation of vrittis in the form of avidya, which is deeply rooted in us and conceals our true spiritual identity. So when Chitta Vritti Nirodha is achieved, the self establishes itself in its true nature and dukkha is eliminated. One may say, okay, Chitta Vritti Nirodha is fine and ought to be practiced in order to rid oneself of the dukkhas. But how can that be done? Is it even feasible? Because if you think about it, on the face of it, it appears that Sage Patanjali is giving instructions regarding the death of the Chitta. And if that is true, then how is the aspirant of yoga or a yogi going to understand and follow any of the instructions, as the Chitta has stopped all its operations? The aspirant will neither be able to think or remember or discriminate and reason. Also, his self-identity will be annihilated. We know that there have been yogis in the past and there are yogis in the present time. What exactly is it to be a yogi who restrains his Chitta? Does one have to conquer one's Chitta to attain Kaivalya or liberation? Even to achieve Kaivalya, both the body and the Chitta are needed, as one requires one's body and mind to follow the instructions of Sage Patanjali or any of the gurus. This means we are missing some important point, and that important point is, when Sage Patanjali suggests Chitta Vritti Nirodha, he is not asking us to negate or suppress or eliminate Chitta. Rather, we should negate the identification of the self with the material things. Notice the third and the fourth sutra from the Samadhi Pada, which come immediately after the sutra Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which means restraint of mental operations. The third sutra is Tada drashtuha swarupe avasthanam, meaning then after Chitta Vritti Nirodha or the restraint of mental operations, the pure awareness or Purusha can abide in his true self. Now, the fourth sutra says Vritti Sarupyam Itaratra, meaning at other times the Purusha is identified with vrittis or the modifications. For example, someone blames me for something and immediately I get very upset. This is vritti because I am conforming to this. I am identifying myself with it. So, what the sutra explains is that this misidentification is a process where our self-identity conforms to the wavering nature of vritti. And this misidentification is to be negated, suppressed and annihilated. How can that be done? By burning or destroying the 5 detriments or kleshas, that is avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha and abhinavesha. The destruction of these kleshas will let Chitta dissolve into its cause, which is Prakriti. But the most important question is how to get rid of the vrittis. Sage Patanjali says in Sutra 12 of the Samadhi Pada, Abhyasa Vairagyabhyam Tan Nirodha, meaning the restraint on vrittis comes from practice and non-attachment. Let us understand what is abhyasa. Abhyasa or practice is the sustained effort for steadiness. Restraint does not come in one day. It comes by long continued practice. So, when restraint is practiced for a long time, without faltering and with earnestness, it becomes firmly established. It becomes a samskara. And when a large number of these samskaras are left on the mind, they converge, they become a habit. Of course, it is not an easy-going path. You see, restraint on vrittis requires many more qualifications. It cannot be achieved just by doing yogasanas or reading the Yoga Sutras. Now let us understand the second requirement, which is vairagya or non-attachment or dispassion. It is that controlling consciousness of a person who has no thirst or craving for objects, either seen or heard. The world is full of temptations, and our actions are preceded by two kinds of motives. Drishta, or what we see ourselves, and anushravika, or what we hear or learn from others. One needs to keep oneself in check. The control over the twofold motives arising from our own experience and from the experience of others, and thus preventing the chitta from being controlled by them, is vairagya. One must not let the chitta be swayed by them. More precisely, a vairagi is one who is devoid of both attraction and aversion. The highest level of vairagya is when Purusha or self clearly sees itself as independent from the fundamental qualities of nature. You know already that Prakriti or nature consists of 3 qualities, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. And these qualities reveal themselves in the physical world as attraction, repulsion and inertia. All the manifestations of Prakriti are combinations and recombinations of these 3 qualities. Purusha or self of man is beyond all these. Purusha is pure, intelligent and effulgent. Prakriti has covered the self of man. But when this covering is removed, the self appears in its full glory. Now, a yogi is the one whose intellect is absorbed in the full reflection of the Purusha's purity caused by the practice of the revelation of the Purusha. It is termed non-attached with the qualities of manifested and unmanifested nature. Vairagya, according to the yoga system, is the ultimate state of knowledge. This is because samadhi, which is the absolute state of yoga, follows immediately after this. Anyway, in this lecture I discussed samadhi path as well as the sadhana path. In the next lecture we will understand the intricacies of the yoga system as given in the vibhuti path and the kaivalya path. Thank you so much.